Hello and welcome to etbfsi.com. My name is Amol Dete and I'm in conversation with L. Vishwanathan from Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas. Sir, welcome on the show.
Thank you.
So, not very specific, but there are three important things that the government has done specifically for the banking sector in the budget 2020. I would like to take your perspective on the amendments which they have proposed specifically in the Banking and Regulation Act for the cooperative banks. In last 6 months specifically, we have seen a lot of fraud, scams, and so many things happening in the cooperative bank sector, which started with PMC Bank, and also in past also we have seen many issues with the PM in the cooperative sector. How do you read these things? The amendments which the government of India has proposed in the budget.
I think it's a very good step. I expect that it's going to improve the functioning of the cooperative banks, better regulation, better governance, better supervision, which will be ultimately in the interest of all the stakeholders. So I think this is a welcome step, and I think the government is addressing the need of the situation by requiring better governance of these institutions. They play a very big role from the perspective of the consumers and the citizens of India. They have a lot of faith in these institutions because there is a perception that they are regulated. They are ultimately, supported, by the various regulatory authorities, and therefore better regulation and better governance will only improve the confidence of the people and the depositors in these institutions. I think that's a very positive step.
Okay, so what kind of changes do you see happening? I mean, on a legal perspective, we saw the scam of PMC, we saw another scam in Bangalore, and we have seen and witnessing so many things there. What is that the government should do?
I think that I would expect them to look at the composition of the board. I would expect them to look at better reporting. I would expect them to look at better measures to audit their performance. Perhaps look at how they are within the overall regulatory framework of the regulator. So on the whole, I think a more closer look at their functioning, and which will result in better reporting, better understanding of their asset and liability position, which will eventually lead to a better functioning of these banks.
Okay. Going ahead, after these measures, and cooperative banks are also trying to strengthen and trying to apply for the new licenses, what difference will it make?
I think it is all about the source of capital and what target consumers each bank is setting itself up for. Cooperative banks have had a historical purpose, and they were serving the needs of a particular segment of the society. But as the economy is growing and this convergence of various tools, particularly use of technology, the capital sources are the same. I think apart from the product and segment focus, largely there is no need for all these institutions to be treated differently from a regulatory and governance perspective, because they will be looking to the same sources for raising capital. They'll be looking at the same sources for raising deposits. So I think we should be neutral towards the type of the bank when it comes to regulation and governance, and I think we'll be heading in that direction soon.
Okay, interesting. The government has also proposed three important things. One is the the IPO for the LIC's portion of holding, and also the IDBI banks the stake sale. I would like to know the legal complications here, because both are one of the large institutions in the country. How do you see that is panning out?
I think the IPO itself of LIC is a welcome step. One, it will create liquidity for the government, which is a prime asset of the government. I think listing and its consequence impact will be felt again in terms of better reporting and better governance of these institutions. I think the finance minister herself had emphasized this in her speech, that listing will lead to a better discipline of the organization itself. So greater transparency, better accountability, and an opportunity for investors to participate in the growth story of an institution such as LIC. So I think it's a very positive move, and I think it can achieve the purpose of the government of creating the necessary financial sources for them for development purpose, and also creating a good investment opportunity for the range of investors we are talking about.
Right. But do you think legally it would be very challenging, looking at, I know the government is the only stakeholder, but still, large policyholders, large investors, LIC also has investment in, few other banks.
I think the government's already conscious of it. They've mentioned about how are you going to protect the interest of the policyholders.
Right.
There are a number of legal issues one will have to consider. One is whether it requires any changes to the legislation. That is number one. Second, you also have LIC being governed by IRDA or regulated by IRDA. But upon listing, it will come within the SEBI framework. So, one will need to consider the implications and the harmonization which is required between both set of regulators for dealing with an issue like this. I'm sure you're aware, historically there was a debate on whether insurance companies should be governed by IRDA or by SEBI, but obviously you have a sector specific regulator. But once you have a listed entity, it will come within the purview of the securities market regulator as well. So that harmony needs to be achieved. I think that's one step. And then the other question is they will have a number of holdings in other in other entities as well. As a listed entity, then there will be a lot of disclosure and other obligations relating to its investments, particularly above a materiality threshold. So there's a lot of spade work required in terms of analyzing the impact of looking at LIC in a different form as a listed entity. But I would say none of them are insurmountable. You have a parliament which will take care of these issues of any changes that are required to laws to facilitate this.
Right. On an IDBI front?
I think that is going to be, again, a positive move. IDBI has served a historical purpose as a developmental financial institution. It has become a bank now. I think the recent changes in the economy shows that, again, there is a need for a developmental financial institution. But of course, that is a call which IDBI Bank and its board of directors will have to take. Getting institutional investors or even public investors into the bank will only help providing necessary capital so that IDBI Bank can play a very major role which it has placed in the development of Indian infrastructure. So getting more capital for growth is always welcome for an institution like IDBI Bank.
Okay. Anything substantial that you found perhaps after digging the budget, after 24 to 48 hours after digging the budget document specifically for the banking and finance sector?
I think for the NBFCs, there's definitely talk about giving more liquidity.
Right.
I think which is going to be very helpful. I also felt that the economic survey has sort of looked at the sector at in much more detail.
Right.
And has sort of identified what needs to be done. For example, public sector banks, there's a talk about creation of a central database to use artificial intelligence and other credit analytics, which are typically used in the retail sector, and to transpose that for the wholesale banking, which I think is a very good move, because then you're looking at access to data of all the corporate customers, so you can get a better appraisal done of very large portfolios of loans. So there's lots in store for the banking and finance sort of system. I would say more in the economic survey than in the budget, but it's also an indication of what's on the agenda of the government. So I see that as a welcome step too.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for sharing those insights on budget specifically. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for watching us.